Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel Enjoy Biochemistry. I am Dr. Trupti and in this video we are going to learn about vitamin D. At the end of this session, students shall be able to describe vitamin D with respect to its sources, RDA, synthesis, regulation, biochemical functions and associated disorders. Vitamin D, it is a fat-soluble vitamin which is a modified steroid. It is also called as sunshine and anti-rachitic vitamin. This vitamin plays a very important role in calcium and phosphorus metabolism. Vitamin D2 is called as ergocalciferol and vitamin D3 it is called as cholecalciferol. Both ergocalciferol and cholecalciferol, these are biologically active forms of vitamin D. Vitamin D2 is derived from its provitamin form, that is ergosterol, which is present in the plant sources. Vitamin D3, that is cholecalciferol, it is derived from its provitamin form, that is 7-dehydrocholesterol by UV radiation. This 7-dehydrocholesterol, it is present in the human skin, and this vitamin D3 is derived from the animal sources. Vitamin D is a sterol and this sterol contains a steroid nucleus, that is cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrene ring. Conversion of provitamin D to vitamin D occurs on exposure to sunlight or ultraviolet radiation. So, on exposure to sunlight and radiation, ergosterol is converted to ergocalciferol and 7-dehydrocholesterol is converted to cholecalciferol. Now, what are the various changes that occur during the conversion of provitamin D to vitamin D? And these changes includes the breakdown of the bond between 9 and 10 of this B ring. So here there is a breakdown of bond and there is intramolecular arrangement of double bonds. So you can see here also the difference between 7-dehydrocholesterol and cholecalciferol is that there is scission of double bond between 9 and 10. Now, how this ergocalciferol and cholecalciferol, they are different from each other. So ergocalciferol differs from cholecalciferol by having double bond between C22 and C23 and methyl side chain at C24. So here you can see in the cholecalciferol there is no double bond between carbon number 22 and carbon number 23 and there is no methyl group or methyl side chain attached at carbon number 24. So this is how ergocalciferol is different from cholecalciferol. Vitamin D can be synthesized in the human body, but it can also be derived from the various dietary sources and mainly from the animal sources. Only some mushroom contain vitamin D and the good animal sources of vitamin D are fatty fish, fish liver oil, egg yolk, beef liver. The moderate sources are fortified food like dairy products, orange juice, flour, cheese, butter, etc. Exposure to sunlight, it produces cholecalciferol and the National Institute of Health recommendation is that 5 to 10 minutes of sunlight exposure without sunscreen is sufficient to synthesize vitamin D, that is the cholecalciferol in the body, and this exposure should be before 10 am and after 3 pm, which is called as a safe sun, and it should be person should be exposed at least twice a week. What is the recommended dietary allowance for vitamin D? In adults, 5 microgram per day, that is 200 international units are required. In children, it is 10 microgram per day, that is 400 international unit. Pregnancy and lactation, the requirement is also 10 microgram per day, that is 400 international unit. And in adults more than 60 years of age, the requirement increases to 15 microgram per day, that is 600 international units. Vitamin D, being a fat-soluble vitamin, is absorbed into the intestinal lymphatics along with fat, and this absorption occurs in the upper small intestine. Bile salts form micelles and these micelles are essential for absorption of vitamin D. Vitamin D, it is transported by chylomicrons into the lymphatic system, and through the systemic circulation it reaches the liver. In the liver it is stored, and again from the liver it is transported by binding to vitamin D binding globulin, which is also called as DPP. As it is a fat soluble, it requires transport globulin, that is vitamin D binding globulin. Now let's see how the synthesis of calcitriol, that is the active form of vitamin D3, occurs in the human body. We know that the provitamin form of cholecalciferol, that is 7-dehydrocholesterol, it is present in the Malpighian layer of epidermis of skin, and on the exposure to sunlight, that is the wavelength of 290 to 315 nanometer, there is formation of cholecalciferol, that is vitamin D3, from 7-dehydrocholesterol. Now this cholecalciferol, that is vitamin D3, it is transported to the liver, where 25-hydroxylation occurs by the action of enzyme 25-hydroxylase. This 25-hydroxylase enzyme, it is the microsomal monooxygenase enzyme, which requires cytochrome P, 450, NADPH and molecular oxygen. And by the 25-hydroxylation, there is formation of 25-hydroxycholecalciferol, which is also called as calcidiol. The half-life of this calcidiol, it is 2 to 3 weeks. And this calcidiol, it is a major storage as well as transport form of vitamin D3. And how it is transported in the circulation? It is bound to vitamin D binding protein, that is alpha 2 globulin. Now this 25-hydroxycholecalciferol, it is transported to the kidney, where 1-hydroxylation reaction occurs by the action of enzyme 1-alpha hydroxylase. And this enzyme is present in the inner mitochondrial membrane of proximal convoluted tubules, and this enzyme is a mixed function oxidase, which is cytochrome P450. It requires NADPH and ferredoxin. And in the kidney, 1-alpha hydroxylation occurs, and it leads to formation of 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol, that is DHCC. The half-life is 4 to 6 hours. And this is the active form of vitamin D3, that is the calcitriol, and it has 3 hydroxy group present at position 1, 3 and 25, and that's why it is called as calcitriol. This biologically active form of vitamin D, it has action on various target organs, most importantly intestine, bone and kidney. Now let's see how this vitamin D, that is the active form of vitamin D calcitriol, acts on the target cell. It behaves like a steroid hormone. So its mechanism of action is similar to the mechanism of action of steroid hormone. Being lipophilic in nature, it easily crosses the cell membrane, and in the target cell, this calcitriol binds to highly specific nuclear receptor, that is the vitamin D receptor, which is also called as VDR. And this complex of calcitriol and VDR, it forms a heterodimeric complex with retinoic X receptors, which is attached to retinoic acid. And then this complex, it binds to vitamin D response element, that is VDRE, on the DNA and modulates the transcriptional activity of vitamin D responsive genes. And because of that, there is formation of messenger RNA, which is then transported to the cytosol, and desired proteins are synthesized. This is the mechanism of action of calcitriol, which is similar to the mechanism of action of steroid hormones. Now coming to the various biochemical functions of vitamin D, the most important function is the homeostasis of calcium and phosphorus. So the main action of calcitriol is the calcium and phosphorus homeostasis, and there are various other biochemical functions also. So it has a very important role in the human immunity, that is the differentiation of immune cells, and it also modulates the immune response. It is also involved in the hematopoiesis. It corrects anemia and hypocellularity of bone marrow. It has effect on the skin because it is responsible for differentiation of keratinocytes, and that's why it is used in the treatment of psoriasis. Action on hair is that it is important for maturation or functions of hair follicles. It has a role in metabolic syndrome. Vitamin D is known to decrease the risk of cancer, coronary artery diseases, hypertension, insulin resistance, stroke, peripheral vascular diseases, and it positively correlates with the good cholesterol, that is HDL, and it negatively correlates with the bad cholesterol, that is LDL, low density lipoprotein. It has also role in formation of hard tissues of like enamel and dentin of teeth. Now we will see how calcitriol regulates the calcium and phosphorus homeostasis. So it has effects on intestine, kidney as well as bones. What are the effects on intestine? The calcitriol increases the uptake or absorption of calcium and phosphorus in the intestine. What is the effect on kidney? In the kidney, calcitriol leads to increased reabsorption of calcium and phosphorus. And what is the effect of bone? Increased calcitriol level is responsible for stimulation of bone resorption. Now, what are the effects of calcitriol on intestine? We have already seen the mechanism of action of calcitriol is similar to the steroid hormone. So, in the target cell, that is the intestinal mucosal cell, the calcitriol is transported inside the cell. It binds to the vitamin D receptor. It forms heterodimer with retinoid X receptors and modulate the gene expression. And there is formation of a protein which is known as calbindin, which is responsible for transport of calcium from the intestinal lumen into the circulation. And in addition to formation of calbindin, the pumps which are responsible for transport of calcium, the synthesis is also increased, and along with this the phosphate is also transported through the intestine, and this is how calcitriol is responsible for absorption of calcium as well as phosphorus in the intestine. What are the effects of calcitriol on bones? This coordinates the remodeling action of osteoclast and osteoblast and ultimately promotes mineralization, enhances bone resorption, promotes collagen maturation, increases plasma alkaline phosphatase level, and increases formation of bone protein, that is osteoclastin. So the calcitriol, it acts on two types of bone cell, osteoblasts which are responsible for bone formation and osteoclasts which are responsible for bone resorption. This calcitriol stimulates calcium uptake in the osteoblast, depositing it as a calcium phosphate hydroxyapatite crystals, and in this way it is responsible for bone mineralization. And further, the calcitriol and parathyroid hormone, they act together to promote the bone resorption by activating osteoclast activity. So this process contributes to the plasma calcium and phosphate level. Now it appears paradoxical because vitamin D seems to promote two different functions which have diagonally opposite effects. But since the bone formation and bone resorption are closely coupled, the net effect of action of calcitriol on bone and intestine results not just in the elevation of plasma calcium and phosphorus concentration but also the subsequent mineralization of newly formed bone matrix. So whenever there is low serum calcium level, the calcitriol acts on bone and ultimately there will be increased plasma calcium and phosphorus concentration. What are the effects of calcitriol on kidney? It increases the renal reabsorption of calcium as well as phosphate in the distal renal tubules, and thus it increases serum calcium and phosphorus levels. It also has an effect on parathyroid gland, and calcitriol inhibits the synthesis of parathyroid hormone. Now let's see how the calcitriol regulation occurs, because the formation of calcitriol, it is a tightly regulated process, and this process is regulated by regulation of the enzyme 1-alpha hydroxylase in the kidney. So this calcitriol regulation, the first mechanism is feedback regulation by calcitriol itself. So whenever there is increased calcitriol, it inhibits the enzyme 1-alpha hydroxylase. Second mechanism of regulation is plasma level of calcium and parathyroid hormone. So whenever there is decreased plasma calcium, it results in the increased parathyroid hormone, and this parathyroid hormone will activate 1-alpha hydroxylase to form more calcitriol, and that's how it is regulated. And plasma phosphate level, it is the independent regulator of calcitriol level. So whenever there is low plasma phosphate, it activates the enzyme 1-alpha hydroxylase and it leads to increased calcitriol formation. So the feedback regulation by calcitriol occurs by inhibiting the action of enzyme 1-alpha hydroxylase. So whenever there is increased calcitriol, it inhibits 1-alpha hydroxylase, and that's why there is decreased production of calcitriol. In addition to that, it activates the enzyme 24-hydroxylase, which is present in the kidney, and it leads to formation of inactive calcitriol, which is then excreted from the kidney. How the regulation occurs by calcium and parathyroid hormone? So whenever there is decreased plasma calcium, there is release of parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid glands, and there is more production of calcitriol because parathyroid hormone it activates 1-alpha hydroxylation in the kidney, and this calcitriol has direct actions like it increases the calcium mobilization from bone, it causes increase in the renal reabsorption of calcium, then it reduces the renal excretion of calcium, and it increases calcium absorption from intestine. Parathyroid hormone, it can also cause the calcium mobilization from bone, it can cause renal reabsorption of calcium, and it can decrease the renal excretion of calcium, and the ultimate effect is increased plasma calcium. So whenever there is decreased plasma calcium through the parathyroid hormone, it leads to increase the level of plasma calcium by formation of calcitriol, and calcitriol has independent actions on the bone, kidney and intestine, and parathyroid has action on bone as well as the kidney, and thus whenever there is decreased calcium level, by regulation the plasma calcium level is increased by increased secretion of parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland as well as increased production of calcitriol. Now this active form of vitamin D, calcitriol, it is not considered as a vitamin, it is considered as a hormone. Why it is considered as a hormone? Because this vitamin D3 cholecalciferol, it is synthesized in the skin from 7-dehydrocholesterol, that is the prohormone, and the calcitriol, which is active form, it is produced in the kidney, so it can be considered as a renal hormone. Then it has specific target organs like intestine, bone and kidney, and like hormones, the hormones are produced in one organ and they act on the distant target organ. Likewise, the calcitriol, it is produced in the different organ and it acts on the distant target organs like intestine, bones and kidney. Like other hormones, calcitriol is subject to tight feedback regulation like other steroid hormones, and it acts like a steroid hormone. It interacts with the genome and it regulates the gene expression. In addition to this, actinomycin D inhibits the action of calcitriol, and this supports the view that calcitriol exerts its effect on DNA, leading to synthesis of RNA, that is the transcription. And these are the various reasons why vitamin D it is considered as a hormone. What are the various causes of vitamin D deficiency? Whenever there is less exposure to sunlight, and this occurs in people who practice parda system, in people who are bedridden for long periods, or inhabitants of polar region. It can occur in nutritional deficiency of calcium or phosphate and in chronic alcoholism. Malabsorption of vitamin D in case of obstructive jaundice and steatorrhea. High phytate content in the diet retards the absorption of vitamin D. And whenever there is abnormality of vitamin D activation, if there is a liver disease or renal disease, then vitamin D activation, that is 25 hydroxylation and 1 alpha hydroxylation, is impaired. Prolonged treatment with anticonvulsants like phenobarbital or phenytoin can also lead to deficiency. And deficient renal absorption of phosphate also leads to deficiency of calcium. What are the various consequences of vitamin D deficiency? In children, it leads to condition called as rickets, and in adults, it causes osteomalacia. It is called as anti-rachitic vitamin. The word rickets, it is derived from the word ricken, which means to twist. This rickets occurs in age group of 1 to 3 years. It is due to impaired mineralization of new bone matrix due to calcium and phosphorus as well as vitamin D deficiency. In this condition, bones become soft and pliable and bone growth is affected. The laboratory picture in this condition shows serum calcium more or less normal or slightly decreased, because whenever there is decreased serum calcium level, there is increase in the secretion of parathyroid hormone, which is responsible for increased absorption of it acts through the calcitriol, and it is responsible for increased level of calcium, and that's why the serum calcium level is more or less normal. But the bone isoenzyme alkaline phosphatase level is increased and the ionic product of calcium and phosphorus is decreased. Normally in the growing children it is 50 to 60, but in the vitamin D deficiency it is reduced. Coming to the clinical features of rickets. In the rickets, the various clinical features are observed like delayed closure of fontanelles and wide sutures, craniotabes, which means of softening of skull on pressure. There is frontal bossing, that is prominent forehead. There is delayed dentition or dental hypoplasia. There is undue prominence of sternum, which is called as pigeon chest. Rachitic rosary, which is a beading of ribs at the costochondral junction. So this is a picture showing rachitic rosary. Then the epiphyses are enlarged. Harrison's sulcus is observed, which is the horizontal depression corresponding to insertion of diaphragm. Short stature, delayed milestones, knock knee, bow legs. These are the various clinical features of rickets. And the important clinical features can be remembered as the mnemonic rickets, R-I-C-K-E-T-S. R stands for rachitic rosary. I stands for pigeon chest. C stands for craniotabes. K stands for knock knee. E stands for enlarged epiphysis. T stands for teeth, that is dental hypoplasia, and S stands for skull changes, that is prominent forehead, delayed closure of fontanelles, wide suture and frontal bossing. So these are the various clinical features seen in rickets. What are the different types of rickets? The first one is classical vitamin D deficiency rickets, which is also called as nutritional rickets. And this nutritional rickets is due to dietary deficiency of vitamin D or due to decreased exposure to sunlight, and this can be cured by giving calcitriol in the diet. Second type is hypophosphatemic rickets. This is due to defective renal tubular reabsorption of phosphate, which may be either X-linked or autosomal dominant hypophosphatemia rickets. Supplementation of vitamin D or its active form along with phosphate is useful in this condition. Third type is vitamin D resistant ricket, and this is associated with the Fanconi syndrome. In this condition, the renal tubular reabsorption of phosphate, bicarbonate, glucose, amino acid is deficient. It is associated with metabolic acidosis. In this condition, supplementation of vitamin D, phosphate and bicarbonate is useful. Then the next type is renal rickets, which is vitamin D dependent rickets type 1. In chronic renal failure, even though vitamin D is available, calcitriol cannot be formed due to lack of 1-alpha hydroxylase enzyme, and this renal rickets will respond to administration of calcitriol. The fifth type is vitamin D dependent rickets type 2. It is the end organ refractoriness to calcitriol and it leads to rickets. It is seen between 4 and 16 months of age, and a unique feature is total body or scalp alopecia, which may be present even at the birth. Here there is either a decrease in the number of cytosolic vitamin D receptors or a structurally abnormal receptors, and this responds to mega doses of calcitriol. So these are various types of rickets. Vitamin D deficiency in adults leads to osteomalacia. This word is derived from the word osteon, which means bone, and malacia, softness. It is due to demineralization of pre-existing bone and there is increased susceptibility to fracture. This is characterized by osteoporosis, where the bone becomes porous and fragile. There is onycholysis, where nail separates from the skin underneath. Here, the clinical features seen are back pain, stoop posture, the bones become weak and brittle, the ionic product of calcium and phosphorus becomes less than 30, and serum calcium is normal or it is slightly lower, and phosphate level is decreased. The bone isoenzyme of alkaline phosphatase is increased. Vitamin D deficiency never produces severe hypocalcemia because whenever there is vitamin D deficiency, serum calcium level is decreased and there is release of parathyroid hormone and it leads to increased formation of calcitriol, and which is responsible for bringing back the serum calcium level to normal, and that's why mostly this vitamin D deficiency it never manifested as tetany. Vitamin D deficiency assessment, and the status is determined based by estimation of calcidiol. This calcidiol is the principal circulating reservoir of vitamin D in plasma and is generally the best indicator of overall vitamin D status. Calcidiol is the major circulating form of vitamin D and it has a half-life of 2 to 3 weeks, and it is the summation of both vitamin D intake and vitamin D that is produced from sun exposure. The calcidiol level, the normal reference range is more than 30 nanogram per ml. If it is 20 to 29, it is considered as insufficient. 10 to 19 nanogram per ml indicates deficiency. If it is less than 10 nanogram per ml, it indicates severe deficiency, and more than 150 nanogram per level, it shows the toxic levels. The various methods of estimation of vitamin D are radioimmunoassay, chemiluminescence immunoassay, HPLC and LC tandem mass spectrometry. The laboratory picture shows serum calcium level normal or slightly decreased, phosphate level is decreased, alkaline phosphate level is increased, and serum parathyroid hormone level is increased. Now, why the active form of vitamin D, that is calcitriol, it is not the best indicator of vitamin D status because its half-life is very less, that is only 3 to 6 hours, and the circulating level is very less than that of the calcidiol, and whenever there is increased vitamin D deficiency, it leads to decreased serum calcium level, and which further leads to increased secretion of parathyroid hormone, and because there is increased parathyroid hormone, it leads to increased production of calcitriol. So it is not the good indicator of vitamin D status in the body, and that's why calcidiol is preferred over calcitriol in the assessment of vitamin D deficiency. What is the treatment for vitamin D deficiency? Vitamin D3 supplementation of 50,000 international unit per week for 3 to 12 weeks, followed by 800 international unit daily as maintenance dose, along with 1 to 1.5 gram per day of calcium. What is hypervitaminosis D? When a person is exposed to doses about 10,000 units per day for a very long period, then it results in hypercalcemia. Various symptoms of hypervitaminosis D are weakness, polyuria, intense thirst, difficulty in speaking, hypertension, weight loss, and due to calcemia, there is metastatic calcification, calcinosis, renal stones can be observed. Excessive exposure to sunlight does not result in vitamin D toxicity because excess vitamin D3 is destroyed by sunlight itself. So in today's video, we have seen about vitamin D, its various sources, recommended dietary allowance, then synthesis, its regulation, various biochemical functions, deficiency manifestations. I hope this video will be useful to you. Thank you for watching and happy learning.